continuing with the program and the content that we'll be looking at or under the program On Air Bible School.
Twaisa mukutwalirira pesambiriro twayimishe mulwa mailo.
So we began to, or let me say, we started looking at the new course, which is a New Testament survey. This is the third course that we are doing, having done doctrinal survey, spiritual formation, and now we are doing New Testament survey.
Twaisa ukutwalirira okusambirishanya mwisambiriro lya kitatu kufuma kutwadendeka batendeke na okupangishwa kuli bumpashi kabiri no efikomo fya bumupashi apano mbatwala twalirira nokufuwairikisha mukipangano kipya.
So yesterday we introduced what the New Testament survey is.
Uwa mailo twaliba abakwishibisha bushe okufuwairikisha mukipangano kipya kyenshi.
And we actually mentioned that the New Testament survey is basically a study of an overview of the whole New Testament.
Twakonkomesha okulanda okwebati okufuwairikisha mukipangano kipya kufuwairikisha kwakushika muli kyonse ekipangano kipya ifyabamu.
And we said the purpose is to give you information so that you can understand the environment in which the New Testament was written.
Obukankala bwotukwetebwako bati twinga pera ukwishiba kuli bayimwe emo ekipangano kipya antema mukyalo ekipangano kipya kyalemberwemu.
And what was going on at that time.
Nefyalo ekitika paliri enshita.
So that you can easily interpret the Bible. You can easily understand certain things as you are reading the Bible, the New Testament, because then at the back of your mind, you know what life was like at that time.
Tulekiteeki mukikomo kyakwebati kingabe ekikankala kuli bayifwe ukwishiba antemwa ukwilula bayibele n'okuyumfa bwino ero twayishiba ero ekipangano kipya kyalelembwa ifyalo ekitika nefyalimu.
Then we also said the purpose is also for you to know the structure of the New Testament and the major theological themes or teachings in the New Testament.
Kabitwa landiro kwebati kuti kuli bayifwe twingamona ukankala ntemo obutandiko emo ekipangano kipya kyatandikirwamo nefikomo imitwe ya kusambirira yaba mukipangano kipya.
And we mentioned that each book will be looking at who wrote the book and when did he write.
Kabiri twalandiro kwebati kila ibuku mukipangano kipya tukalafuwairikisha n'okumona nyani alembere nishitanshi yalemberwe.
Who did he write to and what was the purpose? What was the audience and why did he write the book to that audience?
Amulandunshi ni kuli banani alembere lye buku. Ero mulandunshi alembere buku kuli abo alembere.
And then we also say we will look at the key verses in each of the books.
Kabiri twatire tukalamona ilembo andemwa vesi ilile ikatirira ibuku lyonse.
And then we also look at the themes and the way the book is structured.
Twalandiro kwebati tukamona nemitwe eshiri mu ibuku lilya n'okumona lile buku efo lyatandikwa.
Then we also look at how each book is different from other books in the New Testament.
Kabiri tukaloleshana chimbi ukumona ubupusano bwakila ibuku efo lyapusana kuli biye.
And finally, we will have to draw lessons to apply in our lives.
Mukulekeresha tufire tuwabulako okusambirira kumo kuko tuyingabika mu myoyo Yesu.
So that is very important for us to take note of.
Ekiri kikankala kuli bayifwe ukwishiba.
Then, having looked at the New Testament, we said the overview. Then we started looking at the the word of the New Testament.
ati ero tuwamona ebo tuwalondolwera twatendeke okumona kyalonshi emo ekipangano kipya kyalemberwe.
So we said that the New Testament was written in the first century, which was a very complex. It was written in the first 1,000 years, which was a very complex millennia or 1,000 years, both culturally, politically, and many other aspects like socially. So that is the time the New Testament was written.
twatira okweba ati ekipangano kipya kyalemberwe mu nshitayimo iyakakatako iyali yashuupako inshita iya myaka emyanda pakati mukati.
And then we started looking at the political context. What were the politics there?
Kabi twatambire paliri enshita twatambire okumona bushe munchende ya fikansa fya kyalo bushe yali n'inshita ya musango nshiku kuli inshita ya fikansa fya kyalo.
We mentioned that the at that time the Roman Empire was the one that was ruling. It was a very powerful empire. It maintained the peace and had a very powerful army.
Twamwena okweba ati paliri enshita abali mu butungulushi bali baloma kabiri basungirire omutende bamulando okweba ati bali abapambana mu kutungulula.
And also that they allowed local people or certain groupings of people to manage themselves, but there were certain things that could only be done by a Roman official.
Yabaletira niba empire bwali bufumu bwale tungululo tubufumu tumbi lero tuyo tubufumu batusuminishe ukula tungulula mu ntambi ukuyiteka mu nshila yabo lero temuli fyonse.
So then we moved on to look at the religious context, like what was worship like then, who were they worshiping, what were the different types of religion then. And we started just looking at Judaism and mentioned that Judaism was controlled through the temple, which was the center of worship, and synagogues, which was the center of teaching, religious teaching.
Uliobwa mailo kabi tuwaponene mukulolesha munchende ya mipepele paliri enshita. Twashire monoko ya mipepele iya kosele paliri enshita yali ya Judaism. Umo basungwile itempele nchende imo ya kupepela mu panshita shimo kabiri nama sinagoge nchende shimo isha kupepela mu babelele mu pepi panshita nenshita.
Then we looked at the various Jewish sects, different groupings, religious groupings.
Kabituwa mwene amabumba ya mitungulwile y'Abayuda abayibikire mu mabumba aya kusana.
We looked at the Pharisees, the Sadducees, Essenes, and the Zealots.
Tuwamwena ya mabumba yali mabumba ya balanga Pharisees, ama Sadducees, nama Essenes, nama Zealots.
And we say that each of these grouping had distinct beliefs and practices.
Tuwatira okweba kikira libumba lyakwete okucetekera kumo okwakusana kwibumba ili nankwe.
So the third thing about the religious context within Judaism, which we are beginning now today's message, which we didn't look at yesterday, is that there was what was called messianic expectations. They were looking forward to a Messiah, and they thought that very time the Messiah was going to come, and indeed he came, but they did not recognize him.
Ikyabutatu muli amabumba kwali ibumba limo eryo baleeta messianic expectations. Babo baleekyetegera okuyisa kwa Messiah lyali libumba limo eryo twalatendeka munchende ya buka pepa twalatendeka obwerere okusambirirapo.
In other words, what we are saying that all the Jews were expecting that a savior will come and save them from the Romans.
Munshira shimbi tuletira abayuda bonse baticyetekera okwe bati kukaba omupusushi mesaya ukesa bapususha okufuma mu minwe antema mu butungulushi bw'abaloma.
And they thought that this Messiah will come and free them from the Roman rule and restore Israel's former glory. You know, the days when David ruled and the days when Solomon ruled, and I'm sure they might even been saying Tuali abantu or Tuali Chalo at that time. That's what they were looking forward to, when they would rule themselves under their own leaders and following the law and following the Sabbath and everything written in the Old Testament.
Aba bantu bali bantu bamu abo bakyetekere okwisa kwa Mesaya wakubafunya mu maboko mu butungulushi bw'Abaloma. Ubutungulushi bwa pano pakyalo nga twalosha kunuma ng'obutungulushi nshita kwali infumu David kwali infumu Solomon. Ero abayuda bayitungulwire n'okupepalesa mu itempele bwino munshita bale belefyabulira ngo eryenshita baletire ekyalo kyesu kibwene.
So when Jesus came on the scene and started performing miracles, they said, this is the one.
Ero Yesu Kristu amonekera n'okola kiteefi papo batondonganya ati new winner.
And even other people, they mistook him. They thought he was coming. He was a freedom fighter to free them from the Romans.
Ero bamona Yesu Kristu ali ekiteefi apambana efya pusana abantu bambi batontonganya na mukulu bamwonako ati ala abafunya mubului mufikansa fya kyalo antemwa niumo mufyafikansa fya kyalo.
So they were disappointed when he said, my kingdom is not of this earth.
Ekyo baawumfiire obubi ero baamwene Yesu Kristo antoemwa baawumfiire kuli Yesu Kristo aletira ubufumu bwandi tebwa pano panshi pesonde lero kumulu.
Now when he began to perform all those miracles, they wanted to force him to be their political leader and free them from the jaws and the yoke of the Romans.
Ero bamwene mu maka Yesu Kristo alendera mwayafi papo batontonkene n'okufa okumupatikisha kuti abafunye kumaboko antema kubutungulushi bwa bunkole bw'Abaloma.
Now when you go to John chapter 6 verse 15,
gatwaya muri Yohana chapter 6 ne verse ya 15,
you'll find the following.
Mwalasanga mwefya konka bwefe.
Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force,
ati elo Yesu Kristu aishibe ukuti balesa mukumfuayo kumupatikisha okumupanga enfumu kumaka.
He withdrew again to a mountain by himself.
Afuminepo nokuya kulupiri palwakwe.
So now it is this same reason that they rejected him to be a Messiah. So they were saying, how can you say you're a Messiah? This is not the Messiah we're expecting, to just feed people, to heal people. You know, they were looking for a political figure, a political leader, not a religious figure telling them about the kingdom of God.
Nipamulandu wa ichi ero nomba bafulirwe n'okumfa obubi ero Yesu Kristu alisosere kya musango bena batontonkenyo kwati ero ale ekiteefya ife ala abafunya kuli bunkole bw'Abaloma nomba alala ndafimbi nomba kyaba kwati bafumamo muri Yesu Kristu.
So the other factor that we can see in terms of religious context, other than Judaism, is what is called Hellenistic religion.
Chimbi cho tulemuna muri bukapepa bwaba Yuda balile enshita ichabune kuti twatila icho chile Hellenistic religion.
This is the worship of the Jews, of the Greeks, the religion of the Romans. Sorry, the religion of the Greeks.
Ati ukukupepa antemwa ni bukapepa kwa Chigiriki.
Now there were a number of things that were involved in this type of worship for the Greeks.
Mwali fintu fyalekanalekana muri bukapepa antemwa mukupepa kwa musango oyu kwa Chigiriki.
The first thing is what we call polytheism. This is the worship of multiple gods.
Ichakubalirapo muri ukukupepa niyo batila polytheism iyo yakupepa tuleso twingi.
So both the Greeks and the Romans, or both the Greek world and Roman world, or Greco-Roman world, if we combine them, was polytheistic, worshipping numerous gods and goddesses.
Nga twamona babiri aba amabuteekwa abiri abakigiriki n'abalomani baali bantu bamu abacetekere mu kupepa tulesa utwingi utwapusana.
Tuleso tuamena tuleso tuanakashi.
They used to worship the female and male gods.
And so now the other critical part with this type of religion, which is very different from the Jewish religion, was what is called the emperor worship.
Ikintu kimwe kyaliko ekyapusanako kukupepa kw'Abaroma nicho baleetira okupepa kwa Kiroma.
And this is where they worship the emperor, they worship the king who was ruling at that time.
Okupepa kwa Kiroma oku yalininsira imo yo baleepeperamu infumu yoleeteeka palire enshita.
And this is what created a problem for Christians, because when they said Jesus is Lord, they thought there was another ruler, because the only Lord or the only ruler recognized was Caesar, who was the emperor of the Roman Empire.
Iki ekyaleetere obukalya ntemu okusakamika ku Baroma, ero Abayuda batampa okusonta nga Yesu kuba enfumu kyaba ekyabakali papantu beena baali kwete wa limu musumba okuteeka bonse nga Caesar.
Then that one was also worshipped like he had become a god.
Nawo Caesar oyo alepepwa balemupepa wali kwatini kalesa.
Then another factor in terms of the religious context, they were what we can call mystery religions, more like very secretive, hidden religions that were prevailing at that time.
Nakumbi bukapepa obwalipo paliri enshita kwali bukapepa bumo obushali bwamonekera sana obwali bwafisamako obwaleeta ti bukapepa bwafipapo.
So they were also very prominent during the early Christianity.
Aba bantu baliko ikine n'okukiteefyalekanalekana panshita ya bwina Kristo.
The two distinct ones which we can mention is one was called Mithraism.
Abo twinga landako bambi baleetwa Mithraism.
This one originated from Persia, or today we can call it Iran, where the worship of Mithra who was an ancient god of light and truth, but then he was adapted into the Roman context.
Kabiri okukupepa palino nshita muli chikyalo kyaleetwa Persia kutwalira ku Iran. Uyu kupepa oku kwali kumo kwasungirwe obale pepalesa uwakale oba kwete
the god of light and truth.
Uwalinilesa bachetekelemo uwalubuto nechine.
And then we had the worship of Isis, the cult of Isis.
Wali na bambi abale pepa Isis.
Now this one, the worship of Isis, this was an ancient goddess of Egypt.
Kabiri uyu Isis alinilesa omwana kashiwa kale.
And she was a goddess of fertility, motherhood, and magic.
Kabiri uyulesa mwana kashi alinilesa wale bapela ntemwa wale monekela muli magiki wale monekela mubufyashi na nokuba nyina lesa omwana kashi.
So this Isis spread throughout the Greek world and the Roman Empire.
Okukupepa wali ukwasalangana mumikalire y'Abaroma.
So now, we have seen what the politics was like, who was ruling, who were the different political parties, what was going on. That is one part. But now we have seen what religion was like, different types of religious activities.
Tumona mufikansa fyachalo palina nshitafo fyali uwaleteka nemo chali mo fyalondolwera na mukusunga amafunde nombe chichaka niko chimbina chena muli bukapepa.
So now let's look at the social context of the New Testament.
Zombana tumone icha chitatu mumikalile ya nshita ya chipangano chipya.
So the first thing is family and household.
Imikalile icha kubalirapo nindukwa na mayanda imikalile.
So the family and household was the basic social unit with extended family members living together.
Kuli okwikala kwa lupwa n'okwikala kwa mayanda kwali kyali kintu kikalamba ikyamikalire paliri enshita.
And they would even have a patriarch, a senior person, controlling the family dynamics of each of those families.
Kabiri mukwikala kwa ndukwa muliri enshita kwaleba n'okukwata ummo ng'entungulu shimulukwa umukalamba wali uwakutungulwa n'okumfwa.
So all those social activities of marrying, getting married, divorce, and all those activities, how children were brought up, how children were taught, actually happened in the environment of a family and a household.
Ivi fyonse fyapala umwakusungira abaana ifyo abaana bafuire bakula ifyo abantu bafuire bayikala mundukwa mukwikala mukulekana mukupa mukutite fyakusana emolukwa lwabeera fyonse ifi fyayikele munchende yichipimpi eki.
Let's go to number 4. We are looking at the cultural context of the New Testament. How did they live? What was the culture of the New Testament environment, New Testament world?
Ichabune na tumone bushe nintambinshi baliri enshita ya chipangano chipya nintambinshi yaliko bushe fiko monshi muntambinshi ya fyalimo.
The first thing is what is called Hellenism. Hellenism has to do with the Greeks.
Ichakubalirapo ilishuwiliretila Hellenism chintu chimo ichasekele ichakuchita mumutundu wa Chigiriki.
Now the first thing what was very important at that time was the Greek language.
Ichakubalirapo ichali chikangala paliri enshita mutundu wa Chigiriki.
And the type of Greek they were speaking at that time was Koine Greek.
No mutundu wa chitundu cha Greek walelandwa paliri enshita omotuletila Koine Greek.
Now remember, Koine Greek was like the way English is today. It was the one that you used for communicating with other people, doing business with different other people. If you know English, you can easily survive in the world.
Koine Greek chilikwati nino nshita emo chibelele chisungu ngana wishibe chisungu chili chayanguka kuliwe kulanda na abantu abengi kuchira erota wishibe chisungu.
Now you have to understand that the ones who were ruling were Romans, but the language being used in the empire was Greek.
Isentumone vuye twayishwa kwati abale tungulula misumba shonse bali baloma lelo echitundu chalelandwa chali Chigiriki.
Because of the previous empire, the Greek Empire, which had also spread far and wide, the language was there, and it took time for the Roman language, which was Latin, to take root in the Roman Empire.
Nipamulandwa kwati mukutendeka elo abaloma tabalambo tungulula abatungulwile Bagiriki napamulandwa echo Abagiriki bafundile sana nantemwa basuminishe sana echitundu kyabo kwikala echo kyali kyashupa abaloma kuti bengishemu echitundu kyabo echo batwalirire ne Chigiriki.
So, but of course later on Latin became prevalent, especially in the western part of the kingdom. The second thing in terms of cultural context was education and philosophy. So the Greeks actually liked a lot of learning.
kusambirira.
So they would argue, they would present issues. Remember in Acts 17, Paul goes to Athens and finds them they are trying to listen to something new.
Nga tuwamona eyi nga tuwamona mu Bayibuli tuwamona na kulipo kuli libumba abantu ero po aya kulya kwa Athens abantu balefwaisha sana okusambira n'okwipushanya sana n'okutalikana bafyo balesambirira.
And there's a statement that those men did nothing except hearing what was new. I'm sure they had already worked, they had passive income, so they didn't need to work, or slaves were working for them. So imagine every day you wake up, you just want to hear what is new, what is the latest invention, what is the latest knowledge available. And that's how Paul, having understood that cultural context, he was able to plant a church in Athens.
Mulandu ina abantu bayikere nga abantu bamwe abalefwa okumfu ekipya mukusambirira efipya kiranshita era wabuuka beena balifye bonfweko kinshizirika ekipya maano nshaya pya yayisako. Mulandu ine na Paulo tambire ulukuta kulya kunchende kwa Athens.
So not only do we have the Greek culture or Hellenistic culture, we also have the Roman culture.
Tekutira fye twakwete fye intambi sha Bagiriki twali kwete n'entambi sha Kiroma.
And you know the thing that we can look at the Roman culture is that the Romans had a very strong legal system, like we discussed yesterday.
So tuyingaloleshapo okulolesha kuba Roma intambi sha Kiroma bena bali kwete inshira yakusungiramu amafunde n'okumona amafunde yalebomba iyamaka.
So the Roman law influenced the legal proceedings described in the New Testament.
Nga tuwamona mu kipangano kipya n'intandiko sha Kiroma mu mafunde ishayibirinamu.
Then the other thing that influenced Roman life or culture was architecture and engineering. If you know, like constructing buildings, roads, and waterways, and transportation systems.
Na chimbi cha ntambi cha ikatirire pali yenshita ninchende ya Kiroma iya kuba mufya kukula ifya kupanga ngefya kubomfya mukusende fintu ifya kupange fintu fine fya.
So they built roads, they built other aqueducts, like piping system where they would they would transport water from one area and take it to another area using concrete structures.
Nga tuwamona abantu bamwe pamulandu wa ichikomo bayikeremu antemu entambi ishibakwete ishafya kupanga balepanga limbya mapaipi kusenda menshi kupita panshi ukuya kufuma kuchalo echi ukuya kuchalo chimbi limbi misebo bapanga filafine.
So this facilitated travel and communication, as we mentioned yesterday.
Ifi yalengele imyendele nokumfwa nokwampana mukatika abantu ukwanguka.
And it also it made it easy for the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Ichichonse chalundireko ukwanguka na kukusabankanya imbila nsuma palwa kwa Yesu Kristo.
The fifth aspect of the cultural context was the Jewish culture, especially scriptures.
Icha number 5 icho cha likonge ntambi ichali chaba Yuda mumalembo.
So the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, were central to Jewish life and thought, with frequent references and allusion in the New Testament. In other words, the Old Testament was the Bible of the New Testament, of the early church, of the first century world.
Mukulanda pali chitwalanda ichaba Yuda mumalembo. Chipangano chakale chali chimwe echo balero lishako mukwikala kwabo nokumona ichalengwa ukwisa ku chipangano chipya.
Even the leaders of the New Testament, the Bible they had was the Old Testament. They didn't have the New Testament, since they are the ones who wrote the New Testament.
Na basambi abena Kristo bakubala bakwete ekipangano kyakale tabaali tabalakwata ekipangano kipya nipamulandu wakwati kabiri ekipangano kipya eba kirembere.
The other thing in terms of cultural context, you have festivals and customs. Jewish religious festivals such as Passover, Pentecost, and many others, the First Harvest, all these shaped the context of the New Testament events.
Mu ntambi y'Abayuda banshita ya kipangano kipya balikwete ifintu ng'efyakusefya kulingana n'entambi syabo nga Passover ikyakukirira isabata ifyakusana mu kusefya.
So all these controlled or give us the environment of the New Testament.
Fyonse efi fyatungulwire n'okutulanga emu kyabeerere mu nshita ya kipangano kipya.
So the other thing that we need to look at, the fifth context that we have looked at, in case you are joining us, we started looking at number one, political context, like how the world of the New Testament was ruled, who were the politicians of those days.
Nga kyakweba ti mwairundako fero mwamba fyokunfa kuli baifwe twakitendeka mu mikalire bayikelemu elo ekipangano kipya kyalelembwamu ekyakubala nimufikanza fyakyalo ikyakonkapo twakiraloesha muli buka pepa emu bayikalire.
So yes, we looked at the religious context, what were the religions, what were the major religions, who were the major players in that religion.
Twakiraloesha bushe nibuka pepa nshibwa wakulire nangwa abalimu muli bulya buka pepa abatungulule buka pepa bulya bantu ba musangoki.
Then we started looking at the social context, like how life was socially, and one of the things I think that I've missed out on the social context was that the life was consisted of both the urban and rural areas.
Chimbi kyo twatuloeshapo ekya butatu mu ntambi makamaka panshita ya kulembwa kwa kipangano kipya mikalire y'abantu imikalire yalinga kalale na kumushe.
And the urban centers were the centers of trade, culture, and political activity. Places like Jerusalem, Rome, Corinth, these were the urban areas or the major cities of those days, which controlled life, politics, and other things.
Inchende shali kwa tisha pamulu mukalale. Inchende shali ishaku chinjanishamo ubukwebo, isha kulima, isha fikanza fyakyalo, moshale ekitikiya yali kwa tinchende nga Jerusalem, inchende nga Rome, inchende nga Corinth, nga Ephesus.
And then there was also the rural area. The rural area, like the rural area is today, the rural areas not changed very much. This is a life that was dominated by small villages and small towns in different places, but it was based on agriculture.
Lelo inchende ishalinga inchende shakumushi ninchende isho shilapusana sana mukuchinja na muli lelo inenshita ninchende shali ngemishi ekwali fye makamaka ubulimi nokuchita ifya mushiri.
And then the other thing in terms of the social context was that the life there was lived in a hierarchy, with various classes and various categories of people.
Lelo nga twaisa mu mikalire etwikaliramu bale ikaliramu yali mikalire imo ya butanchiko nga abantu bapamulu ya butanchiko mu mikalire abapamulu abakankala na byafine mu bale konga.
So you had the elite, the ones who were at the top, the ones who were rich at the top.
Twakwete abantu nga bali abakankala bakanabesa abali pamulu.
Then you had the free citizens. These are people who had never been slaves before.
twakwete n'abantu mbwa abo abakyalipo mu busha nshita eri yonse.
Then you had freed men. These are former slaves, in other words.
Kabiri mukati ka kwikala kwabo kwalina abantu balya abakakwirwe abalipo abasha.
And they would have obtained their freedom, either their bosses released them or they paid money or whatever. These are the freed men.
Aba bantu abali abantungwa bali bantu bamu abalekererwe mu bushalimbi bali abali batungulwa babalekerera bifye bimbi balipira endala mapyafine kuti bengafuma mu busha.
Then finally you had slaves.
Mukulekeresha mukwikala kwabo kwali abasha.
These were the lowest forms of members of society.
Ababasha bali bantu abapanshi bo balolesha panshi mukati ka mikalire egyeshita.
Then finally the social life, second last, we had the patriarchy society, which was a society dominated by men, with women having limited rights and limited roles.
Kabiri twakwete ebumbalimbi bakwete ebumbalimbi lyo baleeta amapatriarch abo bantu abayikele abali baume abakwete banamayo abashakwete ensambu ishikalamba.
And of course then there was a family household which we talked about earlier. The family and household, this was a basic unit with an extended family members living together.
Kabiri futi twesa kwate emikalire ya kwikalanga abantu imikalire yo baleikala mundupwa nendupwa limbi mwana bayama banani abakusana lero baleikala kwa.
Then of course we talked about the cultural context, how life was lived, what was the culture of that time.
Lero futi twakilanda pafyo abantu bayikere bushe imikalire yali shani palide enshitanga mu
So now let's look at the economic context. Let's look at the economic context in things to do with business, making money and all that.
Nomba pana tuloleshe imikalire nga mumbukwebo kupanga obwikalo okukwata obwikalo.
So the first thing was agriculture, which controlled the economic activity of those days.
Ekyakubalirapo ekyo kyatungulwire imikalire yaire enshita antemo obunonshi bwaire enshita obulimi.
So this was a primary occupation, with farming and shepherding being common.
Iki kyali kintu kimwe ekyasekere makamaka mukusunga kwanama okwo kwasekere pakati ka yenshita.
And cultivating crops.
Kabiri no kulima ifisabo.
Number 2, there was trade and commerce.
Ekyabubiri kwali ukwambana mukuchinjanya ifi yabukwebo.
So significant urban centers with trade routes linking various parts of the Roman Empire.
Kabiri kwali ifindu fyalekana ng'emisebo ifyo fyale suntinkanya emisumba makamaka mulya musumba wa utungulushi wa Baroma.
And because of this, it was very easy to trade different things, silk, stones and various other activities that were going on at that time.
Pamulanduwa ekikyali kyayanguka muku kitishanya ifintu fyalekana ng'omukuba ifintu fyakufuala fyabafye mu bukwebo.
The third aspect that was important during the time of Jesus in terms of the economic context was taxation.
Ikyabutatu panshita yakwa Yesu Kristu ikyali ekitika munshira ya bukwebo kyali kyakupoka imisonko.
So heavy taxes were imposed by the Roman and local authorities, and it affected the economic conditions and social unrest. So the Gen Zs of those days, they were also up in arms because of the heavy taxes. There was no IMF or World Bank, but the IMF and World Bank of those days was just the Roman Empire itself.
Ati napalirye enshita mutungulushi bwa Chiroma wakushishe umutengo wa misonko. icho kyaleetere okutitikishiwa kuli bali abapanshi abashali kabiri kyaleetere okusamwa kuli bali abaleebombera mu kupoka emisonko.
So let's look at the sixth part of the context, which we call the type of writings the New Testament is made up of.
Na tumone ekya number 6 ekyo kireetera ti literary context emo muli ukulemba ukwapusana imirembere ya ibeerako mukulemba kipangano kipya.
So we have the Gospels, which provide the biographical account of Jesus' life and ministry.
Tukwata imbila nsuma iyo ikatirira antemwelela ndasana pa mweo wakwa Yesu Kristo no kubomba kwa Yesu Kristo.
Then there are episodes which are letters addressing theological issues, ethical teachings and practical advice to the early Christian communities.
Kabiri tukwata makalata ayo yalela ndasana mukusambirisha kwakwalesa okusokola kwakwalesa imbela n'okufunda n'emikadire emikitire ya bwina Kristo mwibumba bena Kristo bekadire.
Then we have historical accounts like the book of Acts, which talks about how the church started and how it spread to the rest of the Roman Empire.
Kabiri tukwata n'emitendekere ntuntuko ya bwina Kristo kunuma ero tulemona ukubelenga ntemo kumona imirimo y'abatumwa.
And of course we have the apocalyptic literature, which is the book of Revelation, which are symbolical and prophetic content.
Utina tukwata eyo baletira apocalyptic literature iyo ilanda pafya kuntanshi ngo obusokololo bulanda pafya kuntanshi ifya kumwenako kabiri nenshita ya kulekelesha.
Let's conclude the life of the New Testament, or the world of the New Testament, with key historical events.
Na tube abakusondoelela umweo antemwa nshite chalo cha kipangano kipya.
So the first most important event was the birth and ministry of Jesus, which took place between 4 BC and 30 AD.
Ichikankala kyakitike muli yinshita muli chichalo kufyalwa kwa Yesu Kristo n'omulimo wakwa Yesu Kristo uyo wakitike panshita ya 4 eriyo Yesu Kristo talafyalwa na panuma ya 30 panuma ya Yesu Kristo afyalwa.
So this talks about, these are central events of the New Testament.
Efikomo amashinte ya kipangano kipya.
The second major event was the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Icha kibiri imitwe mu kipangano kipya kyatanikwa kwa Yesu Kristo n'okututubulwa kwa Yesu Kristo uko kwakitike mu 30 panuma Yesu Kristo afyalwa.
That is 30 AD. This is foundation to the Christian theology and faith. It is the foundation on which Christianity is based.
Ichi chilingo mufula wina Kristo balilesa antemwa muchichetekero mulilesa tuwakwata.
The second major event was the Pentecost, or the Day of Pentecost, that also happened in AD 30.
Akabiri kya butatu ikikomo muli okukusambirira kwa Pentecost uko kwakitike munshita panuma Yesu Kristo apita 30.
This was the coming of the Holy Spirit and the birth of the Christian church.
Uku kwali kwisa kwa mpashi wa mshilo n'okufyalwa antemwe ntuntuko ya lukuta lwa Yesu Kristo.
The fifth major event was the Jewish-Roman War.
Kabiri chimbi kya kukonka kwekyakitike n'inkondo y'Abaroma.
You know, this happened in AD 66 to AD 70.
Inkondo yakitikwe mu mwaka wa 66 panuma Yesu Kristo afwa kufika na pa 70.
Now this led to the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70.
Ichi kyalengele ubonawushi bwa tembele ku Jerusalem mulya mu mwaka wa 70.
And remember that the Jewish temple was very critical. It was central to the life of Jews and Christian communities.
Ibukishenyi chikweba ati itempele mu Jerusalemu chali chikomo ishinte eko onse wachatekera omwina Kristu alelolesha.
And finally, the major event was the spread of Christianity through missionary journeys of Paul and others throughout the Roman Empire.
Kabiri na mukulekelesha kwali ninshitaimo iya kusalanganya obwina Kristu kupitira mu nyendo antemwa ulwendo baleima abalinga abatumwa abasambi mukusalanganya imbila nsuma.
Now, since you've understood, we've given you a glimpse of how the life of the world of the New Testament was like. We will now begin to go through the various 5 sections of the New Testament service, starting with the Gospels.
Nombepo tuwa landa nokupishamu okulanga ekyalo kya kipangano kipya twala twalirira mukutendeka n'ekikomo kyakubala palifiri efikomo ifiri 5 ichiri nimbila nsuma.
So next week when we come on Friday at 11 hours, we will begin surveying the Gospels.
Umulungu leisa elo tukesa pa Friday nenshita 11 hours tukatampa ukufuwaidikisha mumbila nsoma.
May God richly bless you. We'll see you on Friday at 11 hours on this same station, One Love Radio 104.1.
Tuwatotela lesa amipale tukamonana pamulaba soyi wine omwo wine 104.1 One Love Radio.